Yes, replied the quartermaster, for the Britannia did not touch there while I was on board. And how I came to speak of Callao at Paddy O'Moore's farm was that I learned the circumstances from your recital. Go on, Ayrton, said Glenarvan. I found myself abandoned on a nearly desert coast, but only 40 miles from the penal settlement at Perth, the capital of Western Australia. As I was wandering there along the shore, I met a band of convicts who had just escaped, and I joined myself to them. You will dispense, my lord, with any account of my life for 2 years and a half. This much, however, I must tell you, that I became the leader of the gang, under the name of Ben Joyce. In September 1864, I introduced myself at the Irish farm, where I engaged myself as a servant in my real name, Ayrton. I waited there till I should get some chance of seizing a ship. This was my one idea. 2 months afterward, the Duncan arrived. During your visit to the farm, you related Captain Grant's history, and I learned then facts of which I was not previously aware, that the Britannia had touched at Callao, and that her latest news was dated June 1862, 2 months after my disembarkation, and also about the document and the loss of the ship somewhere along the 37th parallel. And lastly, the strong reasons you had for supposing Harry Grant was on the Australian continent. Without the least hesitation, I determined to appropriate the Duncan, a matchless vessel, able to outdistance the swiftest ships in the British Navy. But serious injuries had to be repaired. I therefore let it go to Melbourne, and joined myself to you in my true character as quartermaster, offering to guide you to the scene of the shipwreck, fictitiously placed by me on the east coast of Australia. It was in this way, followed or sometimes preceded by my gang of convicts, I directed your expedition toward the province of Victoria. My men committed a bootless crime at Camden Bridge, since the Duncan, if brought to the coast, could not escape me, and with the yacht once mine, I was master of the ocean. I led you in this way unsuspectingly as far as the Snowy River. The horses and bullocks dropped dead one by one, poisoned by the gastrolobium. I dragged the wagon into the marshes, where it got half buried. At my instance, but you know the rest, my lord, and you may be sure that but for the blunder of Mr. Paganel, I should now command the Duncan. Such is my history, gentlemen. My disclosures, unfortunately, cannot put you on the track of Harry Grant, and you perceive that you have made but a poor bargain by coming to my terms. The quartermaster said no more, but crossed his arms in his usual fashion and waited. Glenarvan and his friends kept silence. They felt that this strange criminal had spoken the whole truth. He had only missed his coveted prize, the Duncan, through a cause independent of his will. His accomplices had gone to Twofold Bay, as was proved by the convict blouse found by Glenarvan. Faithful to the orders of their chief, they had kept watch on the yacht, and at length, weary of waiting, had returned to the old haunt of robbers and incendiaries in the country parts of New South Wales. The major put the first question, his object being to verify the dates of the Britannia. You are sure, then, he said, that it was on the 8th of April you were left on the west coast of Australia? On that very day, replied Ayrton. And do you know what projects Harry Grant had in view at the time? In an indefinite way, I do. Say all you can, Ayrton, said Glenarvan. The least indication may set us in the right course. I only know this much, my lord, replied the quartermaster, that Captain Grant intended to visit New Zealand. Now, as this part of the program was not carried out while I was on board, it is not impossible that on leaving Callao the Britannia went to reconnoiter New Zealand. This would agree with the date assigned by the document to the shipwreck, the 27th of June, 1862. Clearly, said Paganel. But, objected Glenarvan, there is nothing in the fragmentary words in the document that could apply to New Zealand. That I cannot answer, said the quartermaster. Well, Ayrton, said Glenarvan, you have kept your word, and I will keep mine. We have to decide now on what island of the Pacific Ocean you are to be left. It matters little, my lord, replied Ayrton. Return to your cabin, said Glenarvan, and wait our decision. The quartermaster withdrew, guarded by the two sailors. That villain might have been a man, said the major. Yes, returned Glenarvan. He is a strong, clear-headed fellow. Why was it that he must needs turn his powers to such evil account? But Harry Grant, I must fear he is irrevocably lost. Poor children, who can tell them where their father is? I can, replied Paganel. Yes, I can. One could not help remarking that the geographer, so loquacious and impatient usually, had scarcely spoken during Ayrton's examination. He listened without opening his mouth. But this speech of his now was worth many others, and it made Glenarvan spring to his feet, crying out, "You, Paganel, you know where Captain Grant is?" "Yes, as far as can be known." "How do you know?" "From that infernal document." "Ah," said the Major, in a tone of the most profound incredulity. "Hear me first and shrug your shoulders afterward," said Paganel. "I did not speak sooner, because you would not have believed me. Besides, it was useless, and I only speak today because Ayrton's opinion just supports my own." "Then it is New Zealand?" asked Glenarvan. "Listen and judge," replied Paganel. "It is not without reason, or rather, I had a reason for making the blunder which has saved our lives. When I was in the very act of writing the letter to Glenarvan's dictation, the word Zealand was swimming in my brain. This is why. You remember we were in the wagon. McNabbs had just apprised Lady Helena about the convicts. He had given her the number of the Australian and New Zealand Gazette, which contained the account of the catastrophe at Camden Bridge. Now, just as I was writing, the newspaper was lying on the ground, folded in such a manner that only 2 syllables of the title were visible. These 2 syllables were Aland. What a sudden light flashed on my mind. Aland was one of the words in the English document, one that hitherto we had translated a tear, and which must have been the termination of the proper noun, Zealand. "Indeed," said Glenarvan. "Yes," continued Paganel with profound conviction. "This meaning had escaped me, and do you know why? Because my wits were exercised naturally on the French document, as it was most complete, and in that this important word was wanting." "Oh, oh," said the Major. "Your imagination goes too far, Paganel, and you forget your former deductions." "Go on, Major, I am ready to answer you." "Well then, what do you make of your word Austra?" "What it was at first, it merely means southern countries." "Well, and this syllable, Indi, which was first the root of the Indians, and second the root of the word indigenes?" "Well, the third and last time," replied Paganel, "it will be the first syllable of the word indigence." "And contin," cried McNabbs, "does that still mean continent?" "No, since New Zealand is only an island." "What then?" asked Glenarvan. "My dear lord," replied Paganel, "I am going to translate the document according to my third interpretation, and you shall judge. I only make 2 observations beforehand. First, forget as much as possible preceding interpretations, and divest your mind of all preconceived notions. Second, certain parts may appear to you strained, and it is possible that I translate them badly, but they are of no importance. Among others, the word agony, which chokes me, but I cannot find any other explanation. Besides, my interpretation was founded on the French document, and don't forget it was written by an Englishman, who could not be familiar with the idioms of the French language. Now then, having said this much, I will begin." And slowly articulating each syllable, he repeated the following sentences. "Le 27th Juin, 1862, le Toimats Britannia, de Glasgow, a sombre après une longue agonie dans les mers australes sur les côtes de la Nouvelle-Zélande, in English Zealand. Du matelot et le capitaine Grant ont pu voyer border. La continuellement en p roya une cruel ind agents, ils ont jitsi document par de longitude at 37 degrees 11 de lat idude. Venex allure seckers o ils sont perdus?" On the 27th of June, 1865, the 3-mast vessel Britannia of Glasgow has foundered after a long agony in the southern seas on the coast of New Zealand. 2 sailors and Captain Grant have succeeded in landing. Continually a prey to cruel indigence, they have thrown this document into the sea in longitude and degrees 11 latitude. Come to their help or they are lost. Paganel stopped. His interpretation was admissible, but precisely because it appeared as likely as the preceding, it might be as false. Glenarvan and the Major did not then try and discuss it. However, since no traces of the Britannia had yet been met with, either on the Patagonian or Australian coasts, at the points where these countries are crossed by the 37th parallel, the chances were in favor of New Zealand. "Now, Paganel," said Glenarvan, "will you tell me why you have kept this interpretation secret for nearly 2 months?" "Because I did not wish to buoy you up again with vain hopes. Besides, we were going to Auckland, to the very spot indicated by the latitude of the document." "But since then, when we were dragged out of the route, why did you not speak?" "Because, however just the interpretation, it could do nothing for the deliverance of the captain." "Why not, Paganels?" "Because, admitting that the captain was wrecked on the New Zealand coast, now that 2 years have passed and he has not reappeared, He must have perished by shipwreck or by the New Zealanders. Then you are of the opinion, said Glenarvan, that vestiges of the wreck might be found, but that the survivors of the Britannia have, beyond doubt, perished. Keep all this silent, friends, said Glenarvan, and let me choose a fitting moment to communicate these sad tidings to Captain Grant's children. Chapter 19, A Cry in the Night. The crew soon heard that no light had been thrown on the situation of Captain Grant by the revelations of Ayrton, and it caused profound disappointment among them, for they had counted on the quartermaster, and the quartermaster knew nothing which could put the Duncan on the right track. The yacht therefore continued her course. They had yet to select the island for Ayrton's banishment. Paganel and John Mangles consulted the charts on board, and exactly on the 37th parallel found a little isle marked by the name of Maria Theresa, a sunken rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 3,500 miles from the American coast, and 500 miles from New Zealand. The nearest land on the north was the archipelago of Paumotu, under the protectorate of France. On the south there was nothing but the eternal ice belt of the polar sea. No ship would come to reconnoiter this solitary isle. No echoes from the world would ever reach it. The storm birds only would rest a while on it during their long flight, and in many charts the rock was not even marked. If ever complete isolation was to be found on Earth, it was on this little out-of-the-way island. Ayrton was informed of its situation and expressed his willingness to live there apart from his fellows. The head of the vessel was in consequence turned toward it immediately. 2 days later, at 2 o'clock, the man on watch signaled land on the horizon. This was Maria Theresa, a low, elongated island, scarcely raised above the waves, and looking like an enormous whale. It was still 30 miles distant from the yacht, whose stem was rapidly cutting her way over the water at the rate of 16 knots an hour. Gradually, the form of the island grew more distinct on the horizon. The orb of day, sinking in the west, threw up its peculiar outlines in sharp relief. A few peaks of no great elevation stood out here and there, tipped with sunlight. At 5 o'clock, John Mangles could discern a light smoke rising from it. "Is it a volcano?" he asked of Paganel, who was gazing at this new land through his telescope. "I don't know what to think," replied the geographer. "Maria Theresa is a spot little known. Nevertheless, it would not be surprising if its origin were due to some submarine upheaval, and consequently it may be volcanic." "But in that case," said Glenarvan, "is there not reason to fear that if an eruption produced it, an eruption may carry it away?" "That is not possible," replied Paganel. "We know of its existence for several centuries, which is our security. When the Isle Julia emerged from the Mediterranean, it did not remain long above the waves and disappeared a few months after its birth." "Very good," said Glenarvan. "Do you think, John, we can get there tonight?" "No, your honor, I must not risk the Duncan in the dark, for I am unacquainted with the coast. I will keep under steam, but go very slowly, and tomorrow, at daybreak, we can send off a boat." At 8 o'clock in the evening, Maria Theresa, though 5 miles to leeward, appeared only an elongated shadow, scarcely visible. The Duncan was always getting nearer. At 9 o'clock, a bright glare became visible, and flames shot up through the darkness. The light was steady and continued. "That confirms the supposition of a volcano," said Paganel, observing it attentively. "Yet," replied John Mangles, "at this distance we ought to hear the noise which always accompanies an eruption, and the east wind brings no sound whatever to our ear." "That's true," said Paganel. "It is a volcano that blazes but does not speak. The gleam seems intermittent too, sometimes, like that of a lighthouse." "You are right," said John Mangles, "and yet we are not on a lighted coast." "Ah," he exclaimed, "another fire! On the shore this time, look, it moves, it has changed its place." John was not mistaken. A fresh fire had appeared, which seemed to die out now and then, and suddenly flare up again. "Is the island inhabited, then?" said Glenarvan. "By savages, evidently," replied Paganel. "But in that case, we cannot leave the quartermaster there." "No," replied the major, "he would be too bad a gift even to bestow on savages." "We must find some other uninhabited island," said Glenarvan, who could not help smiling at the delicacy of McNabbs. "I promised Ayrton his life, and I mean to keep my promise." "At all events, don't let us trust them," added Paganel. The New Zealanders have the barbarous custom of deceiving ships by moving lights, like the wreckers on the Cornish coast in former times. Now the natives of Maria Theresa may have heard of this proceeding. "Keep her off a point," called out John to the man at the helm. "Tomorrow at sunrise we shall know what we're about." At 11 o'clock, the passengers and John Mangles retired to their cabins. In the forepart of the yacht, the man on watch was pacing the deck, while aft there was no one but the man at the wheel. At this moment, Mary Grant and Robert came on the poop. The two children of the captain, leaning over the rail, gazed sadly at the phosphorescent waves and the luminous wake of the Duncan. Mary was thinking of her brother's future and Robert of his sister S. Their father was uppermost in the minds of both. Was this idolized parent still in existence? Must they give him up? But no, for what would life be without him? What would become of them without him? What would have become of them already, but for Lord Glenarvan and Lady Helena? The young boy, old above his years through trouble, divined the thoughts that troubled his sister, and taking her hand in his own, said, "Mary, we must never despair. Remember the lessons our father gave us. Keep your courage up, and no matter what befalls you, let us show this obstinate courage which can rise above everything. Up to this time, sister, you have been working for me. It is my turn now, and I will work for you." "Dear Robert," replied the young girl. "I must tell you something," resumed Robert. "You mustn't be vexed, Mary." "Why should I be vexed, my child?" "And you will let me do it." "What do you mean?" said Mary, getting uneasy. "Sister, I am going to be a sailor." "You are going to leave me?" cried the young girl, pressing her brother's hand. "Yes, sister, I want to be a sailor, like my father and Captain John." "Mary, dear Mary, Captain John has not lost all hope, he says. You have confidence in his devotion to us, and so have I. He's going to make a grand sailor out of me some day. He has promised me he will, and then we are going to look for our father together. Tell me you are willing, sister mine. What our father would have done for us, it is our duty, mine at least, to do for him. My life has one purpose to which it should be entirely consecrated. That is to search, and never cease searching for my father, who would never have given us up. Ah, Mary, how good our father was." "And so noble, so generous?" added Mary. "Do you know, Robert, he was already a glory to our country, and that he would have been numbered among our great men if fate had not arrested his course." "Yes, I know it," said Robert. Mary put her arm around the boy and hugged him fondly as he felt her tears fall on his forehead. "Mary, Mary," he cried, "it doesn't matter what our friends say, I still hope and will always hope. A man like my father doesn't die till he has finished his work." Mary Grant could not reply. Sobs choked her voice. 1,000 feelings struggled in her breast at the news that fresh attempts were about to be made to recover Harry Grant, and that the devotion of the captain was so unbounded. "And does Mr. John still hope?" she asked. "Yes," replied Robert. "He is a brother that will never forsake us, never. I will be a sailor, you'll say yes, won't you, sister? And let me join him in looking for my father. I am sure you are willing." "Yes, I am willing," said Mary. "But the separation," she murmured. "You will not be alone, Mary, I know that. My friend John told me so. Lady Helena will not let you leave her. You are a woman, you can and should accept her kindness. To refuse would be ungrateful, but a man, my father has said 100 times, must make his own way. But what will become of our own dear home in Dundee, so full of memories? We will keep it, little sister. All that is settled, and settled so well, by our friend John and also by Lord Glenarvan. He's to keep you at Malcolm Castle as if you were his daughter. My lord told my friend John so, and he told me. You will be at home there and have someone to speak to about our father, while you are waiting till John and I bring him back to you some day. Ah, what a grand day that will be!" exclaimed Robert, his face glowing with enthusiasm. "My boy, my brother," replied Mary, "how happy my father would be if he could hear you. How much you are like him, dear Robert, like our dear, dear father. When you grow up, you'll be just himself." "I hope I may," said Robert, blushing with filial and sacred pride. "But how shall we requite Lord and Lady Glenarvan?" said Mary Grant. "Oh, that will not be difficult," replied Robert with boyish confidence. "We will love and revere them, and we will tell them so, and we will give them plenty of kisses, and some day, when we can get the chance, we will die for them." "We'll live for them, on the contrary," replied the young girl, covering her brother's forehead with kisses. "They will like that better, and so shall I." The two children then relapsed into silence, gazing out into the dark night, and giving way to long reveries, interrupted occasionally by a question or remark from one to the other. a long swell undulated the surface of the calm sea, and the screw turned up a luminous furrow in the darkness. A strange and altogether supernatural incident now occurred. The brother and sister, by some of those magnetic communications which link souls mysteriously together, were the subjects at the same time and the same instant of the same hallucination. Out of the midst of these waves, with their alternations of light and shadow, a deep plaintive voice sent up a cry, the tones of which thrilled through every fiber of their being. "Come, come," were the words which fell on their ears. They both started up and leaned over the railing, and peered into the gloom with questioning eyes. "Marys, you heard that," cried Robert. But they saw nothing but the long shadow that stretched before them. "Robert," said Mary, pale with emotion, yes, I thought as you did, that we must both be ill with fever, Robert." A second time the cry reached them, and this time the illusion was so great that they both exclaimed simultaneously, "My father, my father." It was too much for Mary. Overcome with emotion, she fell fainting into Robert's arms. "Help!" shouted Robert. "My sister, my father, help, help." The man at the wheel darted forward to lift up the girl. The sailors on watch ran to assist, and John Mangles, Lady Helena, and Glenarvan were hastily roused from sleep. "My sister is dying and my father is there," exclaimed Robert, pointing to the waves. They were wholly at a loss to understand him. "Yes," he repeated, "my father is there. I heard my father's voice. Mary heard it too." Just at this moment, Mary Grant, recovering consciousness, but wandering and excited, called out, my father is there." And the poor girl started up, and leaning over the side of the yacht, wanted to throw herself into the sea. "My lord, Lady Helena," she exclaimed, clasping her hands, "I tell you my father is there. I can declare that I heard his voice come out of the waves like a wail, as if it were a last adieu." The young girl went off again into convulsions and spasms, which became so violent that she had to be carried to her cabin, where Lady Helena lavished every care on her. Robert kept on repeating, my father is there. I am sure of it, my lord." The spectators of this painful scene saw that the captain's children were laboring under an hallucination. But how were they to be undeceived? Glenarvan made an attempt, however. He took Robert's hand and said, "You say you heard your father's voice, my dear boy." "Yes, my lord, there in the middle of the waves. He cried out, 'Come, come.'" "And did you recognize his voice?" "Yes, I recognized it immediately. Yes, yes, I can swear to it. My sister heard it and recognized it as well. How could we both be deceived? My lord, do let us go to my father's help. A boat, a boat." Glenarvan saw it was impossible to undeceive the poor boy, but he tried once more by saying to the man at the wheel, "Hawkins, you were at the wheel, were you not, when Miss Mary was so strangely attacked?" "Yes, your honor," replied Hawkins. "And you heard nothing and saw nothing?" "And nothing." "Now, Robert, see." "If it had been Hawkins's father," returned the boy with indomitable energy, "Hawkins would not say he had heard nothing. It was my father, my lord, my father." Sobs choked his voice. He became pale and silent, and presently fell down insensible, like his sister. Glenarvan had him carried to his bed, where he lay in a deep swoon. "Poor orphans," said John Mangles, "it is a terrible trial they have to bear." "Yes," said Glenarvan, "excessive grief has produced the same hallucination in both of them, and at the same time." "In both of them," muttered Paganel, "that's strange and pure science would say inadmissible." He leaned over the side of the vessel, and listened attentively, making a sign to the rest to keep still. But profound silence reigned around. Paganel shouted his loudest. No response came. "It is strange," repeated the geographer, going back to his cabin. "Close sympathy in thought and grief does not suffice to explain this phenomenon." Next day, March 4, at 5 a.m., at dawn, the passengers, including Mary and Robert, who would not stay behind, were all assembled on the poop, each one eager to examine the land they had only caught a glimpse of the night before. The yacht was coasting along the island at the distance of about a mile, and its smallest details could be seen by the eye. Suddenly Robert gave a loud cry, and exclaimed he could see two men running about and gesticulating, and a third was waving a flag. "The Union Jack," said John Mangles, who had caught up a spyglass. True enough, said Paganel, turning sharply round toward Robert. My lord, said Robert, trembling with emotion, if you don't want me to swim to the shore, let a boat be lowered. Oh, my lord, I implore you to let me be the first to land. No one dared to speak. What? On this little isle, crossed by the 37th parallel, there were 3 men, shipwrecked Englishmen. Instantaneously, everyone thought of the voice heard by Robert and Mary the preceding night. The children were right, perhaps, in the affirmation. The sound of a voice might have reached them, but this voice, was it their father's? No, alas, most assuredly no. And as they thought of the dreadful disappointment that awaited them, they trembled lest this new trial should crush them completely. But who could stop them from going on shore? Lord Glenarvan had not the heart to do it. Lower a boat, he called out. Another minute and the boat was ready. The 2 children of Captain Grant, Glenarvan, John Mangles, and Paganel, rushed into it, and 6 sailors, who rowed so vigorously that they were presently almost close to the shore. At 10 fathoms distance, a piercing cry broke from Mary's lips. My father, she exclaimed. A man was standing on the beach between 2 others. His tall, powerful form and his physiognomy, with its mingled expression of boldness and gentleness, bore a resemblance both to Mary and Robert. This was indeed the man the children had so often described. Their hearts had not deceived them. This was their father, Captain Grant. The captain had heard Mary's cry, for he held out his arms and fell flat on the sand, as if struck by a thunderbolt. Chapter 20, Captain Grant's Story. Joy does not kill, for both father and children recovered before they had reached the yacht. The scene which followed, who can describe? Language fails. The whole crew wept aloud at the sight of these 3 clasped together in a close, silent embrace. The moment Harry Grant came on deck, he knelt down reverently. The pious Scotchman's first act on touching the yacht, which to him was the soil of his native land, was to return thanks to the God of his deliverance. Then, turning to Lady Helena and Lord Glenarvan and his companions, he thanked them in broken words, for his heart was too full to speak. During the short passage from the isle to the yacht, his children had given him a brief sketch of the Duncan's history. What an immense debt he owed to this noble lady and her friends. From Lord Glenarvan, down to the lowest sailor on board, how all had struggled and suffered for him. Harry Grant expressed his gratitude with such simplicity and nobleness, his manly face suffused with pure and sweet emotion, that the whole crew felt amply recompensed for the trials they had undergone. Even the impassible Major himself felt a tear steal down his cheek, in spite of all his self-command, while the good, simple Paganel cried like a child who does not care who sees his tears. Harry Grant could not take his eyes off his daughter. He thought her beautiful, charming, and he not only said so to himself, but repeated it aloud, and appealed to Lady Helena for confirmation of his opinion, as if to convince himself that he was not blinded by his paternal affection. His boy, too, came in for admiration. How he has grown, he is a man, was his delighted exclamation, and he covered the 2 children so dear to him with the kisses he had been heaping up for them during his 2 years of absence. Robert then presented all his friends successively, and found means always to vary the formula of introduction, though he had to say the same thing about each. The fact was, each and all had been perfect in the children's eyes. John Mangles blushed like a child when his turn came, and his voice trembled as he spoke to Mary's father. Lady Helena gave Captain Grant a narrative of the voyage, and made him proud of his son and daughter. She told him of the young hero's exploits, and how the lad had already paid back part of the paternal debt to Lord Glenarvan. John Mangles sang Mary's praises in such terms, that Harry Grant, acting on a hint from Lady Helena, put his daughter's hand into that of the brave young captain, and turning to Lord and Lady Glenarvan, said, My lord, and you, madam, also give your blessing to our children. When everything had been said, and re-said over and over again, Glenarvan informed Harry Grant about Ayrton. Grant confirmed the quartermaster's confession as far as his disembarkation on the coast of Australia was concerned. He is an intelligent, intrepid man, he added, whose passions have led him astray. May reflection and repentance bring him to a better mind. But before Ayrton was transferred, Harry Grant wished to do the honors of his rock to his friends. He invited them to visit his wooden house and dine with him in Robinson Crusoe fashion. Glenarvan and his friends accepted the invitation most willingly. Robert and Mary were eagerly longing to see the solitary house where their father had so often wept at the thought of them. A boat was manned, and the captain and his 2 children, Lord and Lady Glenarvan, the Major, John Mangles, and Paganel landed on the shores of the island. A few hours sufficed to explore the whole domain of Harry Grant. It was in fact the summit of a submarine mountain, a plateau composed of basaltic rocks and volcanic debris. During the geological epochs of the Earth, this mountain had gradually emerged from the depths of the Pacific, through the action of the subterranean fires. But for ages back, the volcano had been a peaceful mountain, and the filled-up crater, an island rising out of the liquid plain, then soil formed. The vegetable kingdom took possession of this new land. Several whalers landed domestic animals there in passing, goats and pigs, which multiplied and ran wild, and the three kingdoms of nature were now displayed on this island, sunk in mid-ocean. When the survivors of the shipwrecked Britannia took refuge there, the hand of man began to organize the efforts of nature. In 2 years and a half, Harry Grant and his two sailors had metamorphosed the island. Several acres of well-cultivated land were stocked with vegetables of excellent quality. The house was shaded by luxuriant gum trees. The magnificent ocean stretched before the windows, sparkling in the sunlight. Harry Grant had the table placed beneath the grand trees, and all the guests seated themselves. A hind quarter of a goat, nardu bread, several bowls of milk, 2 or 3 roots of wild endive, and pure fresh water composed the simple repast, worthy of the shepherds of Arcadia. Paganel was enchanted. His old fancies about Robinson Crusoe revived in full force. "He is not at all to be pitied, that scoundrel Ayrton," he exclaimed enthusiastically. "This little isle is just a paradise." "Yes," replied Harry Grant, "a paradise to these poor shipwrecked fellows that heaven had pity on. But I am sorry that Maria Theresa was not an extensive and fertile island, with a river instead of a stream, and a port instead of a tiny bay exposed to the open sea." "And why, Captain?" asked Glenarvan. "Because I should have made it the foundation of the colony, with which I mean to dower Scotland." "Ah, Captain Grant, you have not given up the project, then, which made you so popular in our old country." "No, my lord, and God has only saved me through your efforts that I might accomplish my task. My poor brothers in Old Caledonia, all who are needy must have a refuge provided for them in another land against their misery, and my dear country must have a colony of her own, for herself alone, somewhere in these seas, where she may find that independence and comfort she so lacks in Europe." "Ah, that is very true, Captain Grant," said Lady Helena. "This is a grand project of yours and worthy of a noble heart, but this little isle—" "No, madam, it is a rock only fit at most to support a few settlers, while what we need is a vast country, whose virgin soil abounds in untouched stores of wealth," replied the captain. "Well, Captain," exclaimed Glenarvan, "the future is ours, and this country we will seek for together." And the two brave Scotchmen joined hands in a hearty grip, and so sealed the compact. A general wish was expressed to hear, while they were on the island, the account of the shipwreck of the Britannia and of the 2 years spent by the survivors in this very place. Harry Grant was delighted to gratify their curiosity, and commenced his narration forthwith. "My story," he said, "is that of all the Robinson Crusoes cast upon an island, with only God and themselves to rely on, and feeling it a duty to struggle for life with the elements. It was during the night of the 26th or 27th of June, 1862, that the Britannia, disabled by a 6 days' storm, struck against the rocks of Maria Theresa. The sea was mountains high, and lifeboats were useless. My unfortunate crew all perished, except Bob Learse and Joe Bell, who with myself managed to reach shore after 20 unsuccessful attempts. The land which received us was only an uninhabited island, 2 miles broad and 5 long, with about 30 trees in the interior, a few meadows, and a brook of fresh water, which fortunately never dried up. Alone with my sailors in this corner of the globe, I did not despair. I put my trust in God and accustomed myself to struggle resolutely for existence. Bob and Joe, my brave companions in misfortune, my friends, seconded me energetically. We began like the fictitious Robinson Crusoe of Defoe, our model, by collecting the planks of the ship, the tools, a little powder and firearms, and a bag of precious seeds. The first few days were painful enough, but hunting and fishing soon afforded us a sure supply of food, for wild goats were in abundance in the interior of the island, and marine animals abounded on the coast. By degrees we fell into regular ways and habits of life. I had saved my instruments from the wreck, and knew exactly the position of the island. I found we were out of the route of vessels, and could not be rescued unless by some providential chance. I accepted our trying lot composedly, always thinking, however, of my dear ones, remembering them every day in my prayers, though never hoping to see them again. However, we toiled on resolutely, and before long several acres of land were sown with the seed off the Britannia. Potatoes, endive, sorrel, and other vegetables besides gave wholesome variety to our daily fare. We caught some young kids, which soon grew quite tame. We had milk and butter. The nardu, which grew abundantly in dried-up creeks, supplied us with tolerably substantial bread, and we had no longer any fears for our material life. We had built a log hut with the debris of the Britannia, and this was covered over with sail cloth, carefully tarred over, and beneath this secure shelter the rainy season passed comfortably. Many a plan was discussed here, and many a dream indulged in, the brightest of which is this day realized. I had at first the idea of trying to brave the perils of the ocean in a canoe made out of the spars of the ship, but 1,500 miles lay between us and the nearest coast, that is to say the islands of the archipelago of Pomatu. No boat could have stood so long a voyage. I therefore relinquished my scheme, and looked for no deliverance except from a divine hand. Ah, my poor children! How often we have stood on the top of the rocks and watched the few vessels passing in the distance far out at sea. During the whole period of our exile, only 2 or 3 vessels appeared on the horizon, and those only to disappear again immediately. 2 years and a half were spent in this manner. We gave up hoping, but yet did not despair. At last, early yesterday morning, when I was standing on the highest peak of the island, I noticed a light smoke rising in the west. It increased, and soon a ship appeared in sight. It seemed to be coming toward us. But would it not rather steer clear of an island where there was no harbor? Ah, what a day of agony that was! My heart was almost bursting. My comrades kindled a fire on one of the peaks. Night came on, but no signal came from the yacht. Deliverance was there, however. Were we to see it vanish from our eyes? I hesitated no longer. The darkness was growing deeper. The ship might double the island during the night. I jumped into the sea and attempted to make my way toward it. Hope troubled my strength. I cleft the waves with superhuman vigor and had got so near the yacht that I was scarcely 30 fathoms off when it tacked about. This provoked me to the despairing cry, which only my 2 children heard. It was no illusion. Then I came back to the shore, exhausted and overcome with emotion and fatigue. My 2 sailors received me half dead. It was a horrible night this last we spent on the island, and we believed ourselves abandoned forever when day dawned, and there was the yacht sailing nearly alongside under easy steam. Your boat was lowered, we were saved. And oh, wonder of divine goodness, my children, my beloved children, were there holding out their arms to me. Robert and Mary almost smothered their father with kisses and caresses as he ended his narrative. It was now for the first time that the captain heard that he owed his deliverance to the somewhat hieroglyphical document, which he had placed in a bottle and confined to the mercy of the ocean. But what were Jacques Paganel's thoughts during Captain Grant's recital? The worthy geographer was turning over in his brain, for the 1,000th time, the words of the document. He pondered his 3 successive interpretations, all of which had proved false. How had this island, called Maria Theresa, been indicated in the papers originally? At last Paganel could contain himself no longer, and seizing Harry Grant's hand, he exclaimed, "Captain, will you tell me at last what really was in your indecipherable document?" A general curiosity was excited by this question of the geographer, for the enigma which had been for 9 months a mystery was about to be explained. "Well, Captain," repeated Paganel, "do you remember the precise words of the document?" "Exactly," replied Harry Grant, "and not a day has passed without my recalling to memory words with which our last hopes were linked." "And what are they, Captain?" asked Glenarvan. "Speak, for our amour proper is wounded to the quick." "I am ready to satisfy you," replied Harry Grant, "but, to multiply the chances of safety, I had enclosed 3 documents in the bottle in 3 different languages. Which is it you wish to hear?" "They are not identical, then?" cried Paganel. "Yes, they are, almost to a word." "Well then, let us have the French document," replied Glenarvan. "That is the one that is most respected by the waves, and the one on which our interpretations have been mostly founded." "My lord, I will give it you word for word," replied Harry Grant. Le 27 juin, 1862, le Toimats Britannia de Glasgow, est per de quins cents luz de la Patagonie, dans el hémisphère austral. Parts à terre du matelots et le capitaine Grant ont atteint l'île Tabor. "Oh," exclaimed Paganel. La, continued Harry Grant, continuellement en proie à une cruel indigence, ils ont jitsi document par 153 degrees de longitude et 37 degrees 11 de latitude. Vines à leurs seckers, o ils sont perdus. At the name of Tabor, Paganel had started up hastily, and now being unable to restrain himself longer, he called out, "How can it be Isle Tabor? Why, this is Maria Theresa." "Undoubtedly, Monsieur Paganel," replied Harry Grant. "It is Maria Theresa on the English and German charts, but is named Tabor on the French ones." At this moment, a vigorous thump on Paganel's shoulder almost bent him double. Truth obliges us to say it was the Major that dealt the blow, though strangely contrary to his usual strict politeness. "Geographer," said McNabbs, in a tone of the most supreme contempt. But Paganel had not even felt the Major's hand. What was that compared to the geographical blow which had stunned him? He had been gradually getting nearer the truth, however, as he learned from Captain Grant. He had almost entirely deciphered the indecipherable document. The names Patagonia, Australia, New Zealand had appeared to him in turn with absolute certainty. Contin at first continent had gradually reached its true meaning, continuel. Indi had successively signified Indians, indigenes, and at last the right word was found, indigents. But one mutilated word, abor, had baffled the geographer's sagacity. Paganel had persisted in making it the root of the verb aborder, and it turned out to be a proper name, the French name of the Isle Tabor, the isle which had been a refuge for the shipwrecked sailors of the Britannia. It was difficult to avoid falling into the error, however, for on the English planispheres on the Duncan, the little isle was marked Maria Theresa. "No matter," cried Paganel, tearing his hair. "I ought not to have forgotten its double appellation. It is an unpardonable mistake, one unworthy of a secretary of the Geographical Society. I am disgraced." "Come, come, Monsieur Paganel," said Lady Helena, "moderate your grief." "No, madam, no, I am a mere ass." "And not even a learned one?" added the Major by way of consolation. When the meal was over, Harry Grant put everything in order in his house. He took nothing away, wishing the guilty to inherit the riches of the innocent. Then they returned to the vessel, and, as Glenarvan had determined to start the same day, he gave immediate orders for the disembarkation of the quartermaster. Ayrton was brought up on the poop, and found himself face to face with Harry Grant. "It is I, Ayrton," said Grant. "Yes, it is you, Captain," replied Ayrton, without the least sign of surprise at Harry Grant's recovery. "Well, I am not sorry to see you again in good health. It seems, Ayrton, that I made a mistake in landing you on an inhabited coast." "It seems so, Captain." "You are going to take my place on this uninhabited island. May heaven give you repentance." "Amen," said Ayrton calmly. Glenarvan then addressed the quartermaster. "It is still your wish, then, Ayrton, to be left behind?" "Yes, my lord." "And Isle Tabor meets your wishes?" "Perfectly." "Now then, listen to my last words, Ayrton. You will be cut off here from all the world, and no communication with your fellows is possible. Miracles are rare, and you will not be able to quit this isle. You will be alone, with no eye upon you but that of God, who reads the deepest secrets of the heart. But you will be neither lost nor forsaken, as Captain Grant was. Unworthy as you are of anyone's remembrance, you will not be dropped out of recollection. I know where you are, Ayrton. I know where to find you. I shall never forget." "God keep your honor," was all Ayrton's reply. These were the final words exchanged between Glenarvan and the quartermaster. The boat was ready, and Ayrton got into it. John Mangles had previously conveyed to the island several cases of preserved food, besides clothing and tools and firearms, and a supply of powder and shot. The quartermaster could commence a new life of honest labor. Nothing was lacking, not even books, among others the Bible, so dear to English hearts. The parting hour had come. The crew and all the passengers were assembled on deck. More than one felt his heart swell with emotion. Mary Grant and Lady Helena could not restrain their feelings. "Must it be done?" said the young wife to her husband. "Must the poor man be left there?" "He must, Helena," replied Lord Glenarvan. "It is in expiation of his crimes." At that moment the boat, in charge of John Mangles, turned away. Ayrton, who remained standing and still unmoved, took off his cap and bowed gravely. Glenarvan uncovered, and all the crew followed his example, as if in presence of a man who was about to die, and the boat went off in profound silence. On reaching land, Ayrton jumped on the sandy shore, and the boat returned to the yacht. It was then 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and from the poop the passengers could see the quartermaster gazing at the ship, standing with folded arms on a rock, motionless as a statue. "Shall we set sail, my lord?" asked John Mangles. "Yes, John," replied Glenarvan hastily, more moved than he cared to show. "Go on," shouted John to the engineer. The steam hissed and puffed out, the screw began to stir the waves, and by 8 o'clock the last peaks of Isle Tabor disappeared in the shadows of the night. Chapter 21: Paganel's Last Entanglement. On the 19th of March, 11 days after leaving the island, the Duncan sighted the American coast, and next day dropped anchor in the Bay of Talcahuano. They had come back again after a voyage of 5 months, during which, and keeping strictly along the 37th parallel, they had gone round the world. The passengers in this memorable expedition, unprecedented in the annals of the Travelers' Club, had visited Chile, the Pampas, the Argentine Republic, the Atlantic, the island of Tristan da Cunha, the Indian Ocean, Amsterdam Island, Australia, New Zealand, Isle Tabor, and the Pacific. Their search had not been fruitless, for they were bringing back the survivors of the shipwrecked Britannia. Not one of the brave Scots who set out at the summons of their chief, but could answer to their names. All were returning to their old Scotia. As soon as the Duncan had reprovisioned, she sailed along the coast of Patagonia, doubled Cape Horn, and made a swift run up the Atlantic Ocean. No voyage could be more devoid of incident. The yacht was simply carrying home a cargo of happiness. There was no secret now on board, not even John Mangles' attachment to Mary Grant. Yes, there was one mystery still, which greatly excited McNabbs's curiosity. Why was it that Paganel remained always hermetically fastened up in his clothes, with a big comforter round his throat and up to his very ears? The Major was burning with desire to know the reason of this singular fashion. But in spite of interrogations, allusions, and suspicions on the part of McNabbs, Paganel would not unbutton.